Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Symposium of STEM Education in the era of AI. I am Zeynep from the Curriculum Instruction and Science Education, and I'll be the moderator of this event today. So we welcome all of you at this pivotal moment in this evolution of educational technology. And this symposium is proudly represented by the Center of Advancing the Teaching and Learning STEM, the Center Catalyst, which stands as the collaborative endeavor between the College of Education and Science. We will have a diverse lineup of speakers today for you, and we would like to share their expertise and insights on various aspects of AI in education. Now, I would like to share my distinct pleasure to present Dr. Wayne Wright to the stage, the Associate Dean for Research Graduate Program and Faculty Development in the College of Education. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage for his opening.
Thank you, Dr. Akmir. You guys just defended your dissertation, so. Fantastic. Well, I'm very excited about this event. This is something that Ahmad and I have been talking about for a while. And just to kind of give you some big picture stuff. So obviously AI and data science as well is a top priority here at Purdue. And we've always had faculty and graduate students doing amazing work in this area, but we weren't very good about coordinating and making sure, you know, what's going on, how are we fitting with the university. So I want to acknowledge our interim dean, Dr. Phil Van Fossen, who was instrumental in helping us resurrect what we had before as a data science committee, then became our AI working group. And Dr. Bill Watson has been the chair of that committee and has really done an amazing job to kind of coordinate all these efforts that are happening, you know, along with some colleagues in other colleges, departments. We have a brand new website to feature these things. And so when you go onto our College of Education website, it's right there in the top ribbon. It says AI/data science. Click on that, and I'll acknowledge you and thank you in a second to help us to put that together. But it's really been nice to have that centralized location to see just how much is happening, how quickly it's growing here in the college. I also want to acknowledge, so we were able for the first time to hire 2 postdocs using the Ross Lynn Research Scholar Fund. So this came through the Office of Research. And as we were thinking about the most strategic uses of these funds, I talked to the dean and our administrative council that we would be wise to invest in hiring 2 postdocs with expertise in data science and in AI. And so we were very fortunate to get 2 fantastic postdocs. We have Dr. Yunfeng Liu. She's been working with Dr. Hua Ching over in educational studies. And among other projects, she has worked on putting together what we call the Craft Data Science series of webinars, where we brought in experts from around the country talking about various aspects of AI and data science. And then we also hired Dr. Ahmad Sudhir. Did I say that right? Yes. Hopefully close enough, Sudhir. And he has been working with the Center for Advancing the Teaching and Learning of STEM, what we call Catalyst, which is right next door. We have Dr. Lynn Bryan, the director back there, and also Sanjay, who works very closely with that. And they've worked very closely with Ahmad on various initiatives, including the creation of a course focusing on AI. So the very first time that we've had an AI-focused course in the college, which is where the symposium grew out of. So we've had several fantastic students. They've been working with other faculty across campus, and we'll be hearing the kind of the results of that today. So I'm very excited about that. I'll also mention too some of the other activities. Ahmad, along with Dr. Bryan and Dr. Bello, were successful in getting an Innovation Hub grant to kind of take that AI idea of having courses and able to create an undergraduate concentration program in leveraging AI, which I think is going to be huge. So we're very excited about it as well. I want to acknowledge Julie, who helped over our lunches, and Catalyst also helped to pitch a little bit more money for that. And the Center for Serious Games, make sure I get this right, Bill. The Center for
Purdue Center for Serious Games and Learning in Virtual Environments.
Purdue Center for Serious Games and Learning in Virtual Environments. So we're here in the center space. Bill's kind of to open the space and also is doing a lot of great work in this area. So we want to thank Bill for that as well. The last thing I want to mention is our keynote speaker, Dr. Kristen DiCerbo. I was really, really fortunate. We had a conference at Notre Dame last year. Several of you were there. And I was really excited to see Dr. DiCerbo, one of the panelists. Dr. DiCerbo and actually are we're son doubles. We both graduated from Arizona State University. It's scary to think about how long ago that was, but it was a long, long time ago. And our paths have crossed a couple of times since. At one point, she was working with some really cool company, and my wife got hired to do some coding for the project, so we got to interact there a little bit as well. And I was super excited to learn that she's working for the Khan Academy. How many of you have heard of the Khan Academy? Okay, right, so I don't need to tell you about that. Obviously, it was revolutionary when it first started, just in terms of the resources it was making available worldwide, and a great educational tool. And now they're making history again with AI through the creation of something called Khan Amigo, which Dr. DiCerbo will be telling us about. But just to kind of give you some context, last night we had futurist Peter Layden was our guest speaker for the Purdue series on corporate citizenship and ethics. And so if you're familiar with that series, that's co-sponsored by our College of Education, our Ackerman Center for Democratic Citizenship, and the Daniel School of Business. And so he was really talking big picture about AI and its pitfalls, but also possibilities. And he mentioned specifically the Khan Academy and Khan Amigo as being one of those examples of what's truly revolutionary in this. So we're super excited to have Dr. DiCerbo. A little bit on Kristen. She is the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy. This means that she leads the content, product management, and design teams. She does this with a learning science lens based on 20 years of experience building and researching digital learning environments, and a PhD in educational psychology, again from Arizona State. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. DiCerbo. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak to you all. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. There was this week a huge ed tech conference. I'll take a little side note here called ASU GSV. And there was a significant lack of researchers at this conference. So if any of you are all thinking about ed tech, all these ed tech folks, no researchers. They were all at AERA and NCME the week before. We've got to bring these two different communities closer together. So I'm always happy to talk to folks that are at universities and thinking about how we use AI in education. And it is always good to connect with my old graduate school colleague, Wayne. So good to see you all. I'm going to spend about 45 minutes just giving you a peek into what we're doing and how we're building things. And then I will also save us at least 15 minutes for questions so that you all can get a chance to ask about the things that you're particularly interested in from what I talk about. So that said, I didn't get to see how many of you raised your hands when they asked how many of you know about Khan Academy. I will assume that most of you have heard of us. Our mission is to provide a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. That free piece is being tested with this AI work. We can talk about that if you're interested. We have about 146 million registered users, which sounds insane. We use this slide a lot to show how big our numbers are, but there's actually an issue here that we're trying to solve in these numbers. And if you look at this bottom row, we get about 12 million monthly learners, which is a huge number. But it's not just about getting people to come to the site. It's about, are they learning? And so one of the things we know and from our efficacy studies is that students who spend 2+ hours per month, which is only 30 minutes a week, but 2+ hours a month, see significant increases in their achievement based on external assessments. But we only get 1.2 million of our monthly learners to that level. So that's only 10% of our learners get to that stage. We're definitely happy to get 1.2 million learners, but there's a big room for growth there and thinking about how to get them to that place. This is a little bit of the research that underpins that 30 minutes a week. Basically, in the K-12 system, one of the common interim assessments is called MAP Growth, and it's administered in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And we are able to correlate usage on Khan Academy both with their growth score, and the line you see across each of the bars is the norm growth. So from fall to spring, there's a normal amount of growth that we expect to see based on giving this assessment to hundreds of thousands of users across the country, and folks that use that in that dark green bar 30 minutes a week from grade 3 in each of the grades that we look at, you can see get from about 26% to 38% more growth than that bar expects. It's an effect size of about 0.26, which when you look at a year-long intervention that is measured with an external assessment, we're pretty happy with 0.26. But how can we get more students to that? And how can we potentially even increase that 0.26 above where we are? So enter generative AI. I have told the story of the kind of invention of Conmigo quite a bit. Sal has also in a TED Talk, so I won't go into it too much, but we were lucky enough to, in August of 2022, so remember that's before we even saw ChatGPT and all of this exploded, Greg Brockman and Sam Altman from OpenAI contacted us and said, hey, we finished training this new version of a model. Would you be interested in seeing it? And Sal and I were kind of like, well, maybe, okay. And it turns out also had been challenged by Bill Gates that their next version needed to be able to pass the AP Bio test, and they needed more AP Bio-like questions to evaluate its performance. And of course, at Khan Academy, we have a ton of advanced placement biology questions. So that was part of their motivation. But they also thought that this model was going to be pretty groundbreaking and wanted to be able to show some good applications of it, and thought that education was a good space to work in, and that we, as a large organization with lots of impact and kind of a lean towards technology solutions, might be a good place. So we got our first peek. They set Sal and I up with a Slack bot with this new model that we now know as GPT-4. And Sal and I were able to talk to it, like all of you probably first talked to ChatGPT. And we were blown away by what it was doing and how it could do things. I'll say one of the first things I had it do was I said, I'm a teacher who wants to use evidence-based practices. Should I tailor my instruction to students' learning styles? Now, most of you probably know that learning styles in the education research communities, there is no evidence that tailoring your instruction to learning styles actually improves student outcomes. It's one of those big learning myths. And this new model wrote a response that looked like something I would say, like saying that, yes, that there's not that evidence to do it. Instead, you might want to focus on some other kinds of interventions that have better evidence for their use, such as ABC. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And of course, also, Sal wrote a good night story for his kids, and we did all of that fun stuff too. But we were also under super strict NDA not to share this because this wasn't coming out till March. But we were able to get access to a few more people internally. We started with a hackathon. We have a tradition of hackathons at Khan Academy where not just engineers, but the whole organization for a week stops doing our regular work and can work on any projects that might benefit Khan Academy. So we had a hackathon in September with a small group of folks, and then we had another one in January with our entire organization that was just centered around AI. And both of those, I think, were key for us moving forward and what that is. To give you a sense of scope, our entire Khan Academy's entire team is about 250 people, which when I talk to folks in universities sounds huge, but in terms of other ed tech companies, it's actually pretty small, particularly for the amount of reach we have. And we have about, of those 250, about 110 of them, about 50% are engineers. So we have a lot of engineering power, and they're, all really, really good folks. So we started prototyping, we started building things with OpenAI, did a little bit of work with them on the model itself, and that it was not a special model that then resulted from that. We are using the OpenAI's models, and in March of 2023, we launched Conmigo, an AI-powered tutor for students and assistant for teachers. So it's been a year now, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about how we've designed things from the start, but also the things we've learned now. a year underway and how we've gotten to where we are. So that said, let me start off with where we start, which is what are the learning problems that we're trying to solve? So we're not starting off thinking, wow, look at this cool technology, but we're thinking about what do we know about learning and what are things that we think this technology might be good for in doing that. So a couple of the things at Khan Academy that we're based on is one, thinking about students being actively engaged with the material. And this doesn't mean just like doing things, it means cognitively engaged. So are they thinking about this material? Are they linking it to things they already know? Are they reframing it, working through those schemas, adjusting their own understandings? All of that is the key that we want to drive to. And how do we make that happen? Second, we know that students are learning when they're at the edge of what they can do, and they might need just a little bit of support to be successful. If you're working on a task and you don't need, and you're trying to learn something and you don't need any support, you've probably learned that. You're probably not learning something new. You might be practicing things you already know, which is also good, and it's good to keep reinforcing those skills, but you're probably not learning something new. And if it's at the point where you need a whole lot of support, kids are going to get frustrated and shut down. So we're always trying to think about that. What can kids do that they need just a little bit of support on? But in classrooms, that's a challenge because there's 25 kids, 30 kids. The teacher can't give that little bit of support to every kid in the class individually. And it's also a problem when you're not in class, when you're at home working on homework. How do you get that little bit of support you need? We've historically done that with things like Sal's videos and the articles that students do. But we know that practice piece where students are practicing skills is really important. And all of you who are at the university doing or assigning problem sets, that's what this is all about. How are you getting that little bit of support without giving students the answers to get them unstuck when they're stuck so they can keep moving forward? So that's one problem we said, this is something that seems like a technology can solve. The other piece is immediate feedback. So historically, Khan Academy and many other ed tech tools can absolutely give immediate feedback on answers for students, but not so much on the steps and how you got there and figuring out where you went wrong. And so that's another thing that potentially technology can help us with. And then the last thing is seeing value in what they're learning. In K-12 in particular, this is the issue that teachers hear all the time. Why do I need to learn this? When am I ever going to use this? Why is this important? And I hear from the higher ed folks of people asking, is this on the test? Which is an indicator that they're not seeing the value in what they're learning other than being able to pass the test. So it's interesting to think about whether some of these tools that may be able to give some individual answers to those kinds of questions might be helpful in terms of motivation. So this was our kind of initial list of thinking about problems and potential places where AI could be helpful for learning. So with that said, I'm going to jump out of here and into, I'm going to do a live demo here. So everyone, cross your fingers. This is our list of courses on Khan Academy currently. So you can see by the new issues, we're always updating new things and bringing things in. But Algebra 1 is our most commonly, it's our most commonly used course. We get hundreds of thousands of students using our Algebra 1 course every month. So I like to do demos on that. Solving equations and inequalities is always a fun one to start with. So if students are engaged on practice on Khan Academy, this is specifically how Khanmigo acts as a tutor. So this is what practice looks like traditionally on Khan Academy. Khanmigo is over here. If you know Spanish, Conmigo means with me. It's also a portmanteau of con and amigo, so Conmigo. So that's a little bit of the naming. Naming things is super hard if you've ever tried to commercially name anything. I'm actually logged in as a teacher now. So this is what the teachers can do. And it looks like somebody's off mute and getting a little echo. If you could make sure you're muted. Here's the student mode. So if I'm a student and I bring up Conmigo, we have some things that a student can say, or we can just type in our response. And I'm just going to say, I'm stuck. And what's happening here is that we are passing of course, what the student says, but also we're passing this problem that the student's working on. We're passing to the model the answer to that problem, because these are all problems on our site that have been human curated and human written. So we know the answer. We pass it all the hints that we're giving. And then we pass it about 500 words about how to act like a tutor. And those instructions come from synthesizing a lot of the research on what good human tutors do. There's a whole lot of research on human tutoring. What are the good moves that human tutors make? How do we define those? When do you summarize? When does the tutor summarize? When do they probe for more information? When do they provide some scaffolding? All of that is how to be a good tutor. And so we take that research and include it in the prompt for how to be a tutor. So all of that gets passed over to GPT-4. GPT-4 response says, no worries, let's break it down. The goal is to find the value of M. Do you know the first step to solve this equation? All right, now what you're seeing here was launched literally last week. These 3 bubbles. Let me tell you why. So we gathered a whole bunch of data of students interacting with the AI. And what we saw was, while we were trying to build that engagement, a lot of what we saw were students just saying, not even saying, I don't know, just typing IDK, 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 not really putting in that engagement that we were looking for. And there's a couple hypotheses for what's happening there. One is students actually, especially in K-12, aren't great at asking questions. They don't know what they don't know. And so it's hard to formulate a question. And they don't have as many of the metacognitive skills that they need to be able to think, hey, this is the part I understand. This is the part I don't understand. Can you help me do that? So we are experimenting with ways to help solve that. So that's one. Well, I should say there's 2 hypotheses. One is that they don't know how to ask good questions and they don't know enough to be able to. The second hypothesis is they're a little bit taking the easy way out. And thinking, hey, I'm not going to put that much effort into this. It's easier not to do this. Learning is hard cognitively. You've got to put in effort to do it. And so there's definitely questions about how we can make that happen. But on the first goal, one of our thoughts was, let's think about how we can model what potential questions could be. And so that's what these action bubbles are. And these are generated also dynamically depending on the context of what the student says. It's basically bringing in different things. Or the student, again, can still type their own piece of what they want to do. We're now looking at the data to see, do students use these bubbles? Do they just click on the first one, or do they, use different of them? What percent of students still are actually typing in their own thing? So lots of interesting little research questions within the big research question of, is this working and does it help students learn? So I'm going to type in, okay, I can add 2M to both sides and get, let's see, 6M and 7 plus 3 equals. So basically now it's sending that, it's working through. One of the issues, see, it says doing math right now. Another issue we've been working on, as many of you know, is math accuracy. And I say many of you know, not that we're working on it, but that it can be a problem. So one of the issues was, how do we make the math more accurate? One way was literally passing it the answer to the question. That definitely helps. But that doesn't get each step in what the student's doing. And so it was still sometimes struggling with student steps. So we've done a couple of things to help address that. One is we have the AI work out the problem before it's responding to the student. And 2, using a calculator to do that, so that we're not asking the large language model to solve the math. We're actually using tools that are meant to do math to be able to solve math. Now, the problem with those solutions is they cause a delay in the response. So we have that little doing math, and we have Conmigo like bobbing its head, because we want students to know, hey, it's not that nothing's happening here. We are, in fact, the Conmigo is thinking about this. Conmigo is doing math. And so then we get the response of, hey, great start. It did like recognize that we were doing that. Now get the M alone. What should we do with the 3 on the left side of the equation? So that's that's a little bit of how just tutoring on the site with an example works on what's going on. Now we have, apart from this kind of tutoring, you can also use Conmigo on videos. And if it's on a video, you can ask it to summarize the video for you. You can ask it to quiz you on the content of the video. You can ask it to find something in the video, because what happens is we pass the whole transcript of the video to Conmigo, so it then knows what's in that video and what it's doing. So we have those are different pieces for our content. And on top of that, we've been creating a bunch of student activities that are also we're learning from. So everything from Tutor Me Math and Science to humanities. So if a student is working on homework outside of Khan Academy and wants some help, they can go to Tutor Me Math and Science and bring their own questions. And as you'll see, if you just say, can you just tell me the answer? It's not going to just give you the answer. So it's quite different from just typing in your question to ChatGPT, where it will, in fact, just give you the answer and all the steps. So that's an interesting question, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But we have a bunch of other things. I know this is mostly a STEM focus, but we have been focusing on doing some writing feedback, which is new for us. And the piece that this does that is interesting is it's not just the piece with Conmigo. Is students can paste in their writing here and then select what their grade level is, what essay type it is. Is it persuasive? Is it explanatory? Is it literary analysis? And this is something that we released in December, so after our initial launch. And let me tell you why I'm pausing here, because doing this work actually was a more sophisticated type of interaction, so that we had to build. So one is, once you get into this, Conmigo starts being able to highlight parts of the text the students responded to. It's able to give feedback on the introduction, on organization, on the use of evidence. And each of those is a separate prompt that we then chain together, because when you start getting the prompts telling the model to be too long, they end up kind of missing, it starts forgetting parts of the prompt, it starts missing out on it. Just like if I give you 16 directions, you're not going to really remember all of them. And sometimes you're going to forget one piece of the direction, and sometimes you're going to forget another piece of the direction. So we have to break them up and do some work to keep them individual. So there was some engineering work to make Conmigo and the essay talk to each other, but also some prompt engineering work to make all this happen. But anyway, we also have some debates. You can debate with Conmigo. We have some games that are things like, they're basically word games that you can play with Conmigo, and just some different things on college admissions and thinking about college and career growth, all that we've kind of been playing with. Let me head back to my slides here and catch up to a couple other things that I wanted to highlight and dive into. So first is, there's a lot of talk in the AI space about personalization. And so there's the question of, hey, can we make Conmigo more aware of student interests and then use those interests in how Conmigo talks to students? So this is another piece that we've added. Students can choose. So there's a little toggle here if they want Conmigo to do this or not. And if they do, they can have a conversation with Conmigo about what their interests are and save up to 10 things that they're interested in. And those then get fed into prompts with Conmigo where it's appropriate for them to have interests. We basically pull them out. Now, to bring this back up to kind of another layer of abstraction, when we talk about intelligent tutors, we often talk about a domain model, a student model, and a tutor model. The domain model is the model of how we think all the skills fit together. So we have our own knowledge map, basically, of how all the skills that we have linked together. What are the prerequisite skills? How did this skill lead to this skill? That's the domain map. And we think that's actually better than we get if you're in a large language model and just ask, what are the prerequisite skills for long division? Ours is based on millions of students interacting with our items. And so we feed some of that, and we're actually still working on feeding more of that into Conmigo. So it's making better recommendations. The student model is where we think about all the information about the students. At Khan Academy, most of that is about skills and skill proficiency. So our model is that mastery learning model, where you work on a skill and you go from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered. And we are storing your current level on each of those skills. Now we're also storing some information on your interests. And we also have the opportunity, and students can set their reading level, because Conmigo can pretty verbose. So we can set a reading level so that it can use smaller vocabulary and shorter, less complex sentences, or it can use longer vocabulary and more complex sentences. So we have 3 levels, also part of the student model. So the last bullet here is this idea of expanding our definition of the student model and integrating that more into Conmigo conversations so that we can continue to think about how we're building through this. So that's one thing we're doing. So what are students doing? So here's some hot off the presses data about which activities students use most. So you can see that yellow line up at the top is the Tutor Me STEM activity. So that is the activity where they are bringing their outside questions to Khan Academy to get assistance. And so that is where things are. Part of the kind of seasonality you see here is students that are in classrooms using Conmigo. They tend to have Monday through Friday patterns and then drop off on the weekends because they're actually using it in their classrooms, not for homework. So that's a little bit of why you see some of the waves there in terms of usage. Video, you see, is the orange. And so we're definitely seeing students using that video piece a lot. About half the students on video are asking it to summarize the video. And then about half of them are asking Conmigo to quiz them on the content of the video, which is interesting because we have exercises about the content of the videos too. So interesting about kind of getting the quizzes right there. And then the blue line is the exercises. So it is not surprising, given that we at Khan Academy are known for math help, that the biggest uses are really getting help on doing math, either working on it, problems that we have on Khan Academy, or bringing their own problems to things. So you can see other pieces. The Tutor Me Humanities is down, kind of at the next level there. Write a story with me is one of my favorite activities. It's set up so that Conmigo writes 2 sentences and then you write 2 sentences and back and forth to create a story. Gets some use. Again, we're not well known for, folks coming to us to write stories. So I'm not surprised we don't see more activity there, but something that I'd like to think about. So anyway, that's what students, just when we look in terms of frequency about what they're kind of using us for. Let's go back to that idea of engagement. One of the other researchers that I look back to a lot is Mickey Chi. She is now here at Arizona State. And she and Ruth Wiley have this ICAP framework that basically links cognitive engagement to learning outcomes. And this lays out this idea of if you move from passive to active to constructive. So constructive doesn't mean like the constructionism in terms of the teaching philosophy. It means actually creating or building or writing something. So anything from getting an answer to a math question, learning, giving an explanation for an answer, saying, how this links to something, those are all constructive, generating or producing something new. And then interactive is engaging in a dialogue where both sides are producing constructive responses. And so you can see the y-axis here is learning. And so in this theory, which has an evidence base behind it, that idea of both having another party who is engaging with you in constructive answers is really important for learning. And that has guided a lot of what we think about Conmigo. That said, I gave you some foreshadowing here that that's not exactly what we're seeing yet. So students absolutely are using Conmigo during independent practice to get unstuck. Great. Students really like language support. So Conmigo speaks many different languages, but particularly Spanish and Portuguese, which for our students who are in K-12 are kind of two of the most commonly used languages. We also have a fairly big presence in Brazil, which is why we have Portuguese as one of the languages that's supported. But students, particularly who speak Spanish in schools, are telling us they really like to have that additional support that they can turn to in Spanish. Teachers and students need more initial support to use Conmigo than we expected. Probably shouldn't be surprised by this, but it is not, in fact, natural to engage in some of the kinds of interactions with Conmigo that we would hope. And one of those things that happens is when you saw this when you first started using these models, that you start off thinking, you give it some task to do and it doesn't do it very well. And so that one inclination that happens is saying, oh, I can't do that, and just quitting and going something else. In fact, if you continue to give it instructions and kind of iterate with it a bit, it will get a lot better at the output that it produces, and you'll be able to get closer to the things you want it to do. That's just one example of kinds of the guidance and hints that we need to give teachers when they start interacting with it. For students, again, as we're trying to have a productive conversation about the content. And one of the things that we saw is that when Conmigo makes a reasoning probe, so when Conmigo says, explain your thinking or tell me why you're thinking that, we actually see even shorter responses, shorter average responses from the students. So their thread lengths are shorter and their word lengths are shorter and there's fewer words. So they either just say no or IDK or never mind. Not great, not what we're looking for. We also see that question quality is not great in terms of what they're asking, but we did see that they use those bubbles to start conversation about half the time, which is what led us to thinking about that active bubble solution that we might get to. But I'm sharing this with you so that you don't think this is all sunshine and rainbows, like that this is going to solve every learning problem that we have. We want to think about now lots of different ways that we might be able to increase this kind of engagement and to work with students to get them to build some of those skills. And we think it's not just building skills to talk to AI. We think they will be better learners if they're more able to explain their reasoning, ask questions, and think about what they know. And that will help them have better conversations with teachers and professors and other peers. So it's an interesting problem that I'm kind of undertaking now as we move into, hey, we launched all this really cool stuff, but how do we make sure that students are actually learning from it? So with that, I'm going to move to closing out with just a little bit of how we think about ethics and safety. Because we absolutely were one of the first folks out the door with something where students were interacting directly with an AI and directly with a model. And so we did that thinking pretty deeply about how we could think about, identify the risks in that and help to mitigate those. So our first basically way to address this is to educate people about the risks, being transparent about what those look like. So that's an important piece of what we're doing, is thinking about increasing AI literacy. We're doing it on our own with a bunch of professional learning for teachers, helping teachers teach their students. We're also part of a consortium called Teach AI. If you're interested in thinking about how we all might come together and address these problems, the Teach AI Consortium has several hundred folks that are on the advisory committee and are working through some of those problems. Second, we created a framework to help us evaluate and mitigate those risks. I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second. We built in safety and security mechanisms. So part of that you see over on the right here. All of students' chats, all of everyone's chats are saved, and you can view them in a chat history. And if you are under 18, you have either a parent or a school teacher account that's associated with your account, and those chats are visible to your parent and your teacher. And students know that. We tell them that. We're transparent about that. Now, I've had some folks say, is that an invasion of the students' privacy that we're sharing them with teachers and students? So this is another place where it's balancing risks and rewards. given this is a totally unproven technology and we're using it for educational purposes, it's not meant to be your counselor, it's not meant to be any of those kinds of things. We thought it was more important for teachers and parents to have visibility into what students are doing with it than to worry about students being able to have private chats with it. So that said, that was the decision that we made, but it's not something, again, that we just went blindly into. We had a lot of discussions about the pros and cons of each of those approaches. We also then thinking about how to embed ethics and responsible development into the conversations that our designers, product managers, and engineers are having as they build features. And we're trying to keep ahead of what the legal situation is. In the US, for better or for worse, we move pretty slowly on these things. But we've certainly seen in the EU, there's more movement on regulations and what those look like. And we're trying to also stay in touch. We are not a policy shop. We don't have policy folks or any of that kind of thing, but we try to stay on top of where all of this is heading. But the biggest thing we did was build this approach using a couple of existing frameworks. So the ethical framework for AI in education is a really nice laying out about 9 principles around what safe AI is. So super helpful to provide those principles. On the other hand, it's more geared towards folks that are purchasing or acquiring AI technology for use in schools, as opposed to developers of AI tools. So we took those principles, but then relied on the second framework, which is a National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a risk management framework. And this is where you start thinking about, as a developer, how do you identify risks and how do you start to reduce those risks? And so we took a whole bunch of potential risks. So you can see accuracy of these models is a huge risk. Safety and avoiding inappropriate and harmful uses is a huge risk. So we made a whole list of risks, and then we rate them on how likely they are to occur if we don't do anything, and the impact of them occurring if we don't do anything. So you can imagine something might have a pretty low likelihood of occurring, but if it does occur, it will have a high impact. There's other things like the 2 here that had a high impact of occurring and a high impact when they do occur. And so that helps us prioritize which risks to really focus on. And so then we take each risk and think about how are we mitigating that risk, maybe bringing it from a high likelihood to a medium likelihood, or a high impact to a medium impact. And what does that build on and work through? So this is how we think about decreasing the risk of some of the things we're doing when we're really out in front of the technology and doing things that no one else has been trying before. So a little bit of thinking. A couple of things I want to just highlight here for those that are interested in kind of the under the hood type things. We do have a moderation API that is an OpenAI's moderation API that that grades every interaction based on 7 different categories like violence, hate, self-harm, sexual content. And we set thresholds, our individual thresholds for where those flags should be, and anything that triggers a flag also gets a note sent to the parent or the teacher indicating that something has been triggered, and the teacher or parent may want to take a look at that. And it also then feeds back into the conversation with the user and says, oh, that's not something that I'm equipped to talk to you about. Let's get back on the tutoring math topic and what that looks like. So that's another one of the things we did to reduce the likelihood of inappropriate uses and harmful uses that we're looking at. So that said, I did include content creation. I know many of you are thinking about yourselves using this for content creation. We've done a good bit of that. Our financial literacy course, and our author of financial literacy was able to cut her time in creating the course, which includes writing not just the questions, but for instance, all the rationales for wrong answers that you see here. All of that got cut by about 50%. in terms of being able to ask questions and being able to do so more quickly, and create a whole bunch of questions that she could then review and say, oh, that one's terrible. Yes, that one works. But it also does things like this. A pitcher throws a ball at 90 miles an hour. So in 2 hours, he can throw a ball a distance of 180 miles. Yeah, that's not how baseball works. So we still need humans in the loop as we're thinking about these questions and what we're doing. All right, I'm going to stop there and let you all guide what you want to talk about next. So let's think about how we can use AI to help us enhance human intelligence and human potential in ways we might do that. Thank you, and I'll open up the floor.
You can ask.
You can ask. She's able to hear you.
No, this should pick up. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it'll pick up. Just talk nice and loud.
All right. Could you tell us about your red team?
Red teaming, yes. So folks who know what red teaming is, it is basically when you try to break the product. And so we had set a whole bunch of guardrails on what Conmigo will do and say. So for example, when you chat with a historical figure, we give it instructions that historical figures are not allowed to talk about current events. We don't want that to be a thing that's happening, asking, these historical figures about things in life today. Too much speculation, not where those are. Then there's also all of that violence and hate and sexual content that we wanted to make sure actually wasn't going to happen. So what we do is we get a group of folks together and say the worst possible things you can imagine to the AI. And it's actually, honestly, a little uncomfortable. Like, if you're not used to, these kinds of thinking in these kinds of ways. And we try, we see how can we get around this? How can we get around the safeguards that we've put in? And then when we find a way that we can, we then try to block that hole and figure out where things are. On the super, unconcerning side, one of the first things that we did was try to get Conmigo to give us our homework answers in all kinds of places, because some of our early testers would try to get their math homework done, like in the chat with a historical figure activity. Like, let's ask Pythagoras about doing this math question. And so we had to go through each of our activities and make it so, nope, it's not going to give you your answer to your math question in each of these areas. So you have to be really creative when you do red teaming and think about, what are all the things that someone might do, and then try to see if Conmigo will really, or our AI moderation or any of those tools we have will prevent the things that we don't want to have happen from happening.
Are there any kids on the red team?
So we have at Khan Academy a really nice group of students, because there is also something called the Khan Lab School. This is a school that Sal founded about 10 years ago that happens to be on the first floor of our Mountain View offices, and Khan Academy is on the second floor. And these kids are not I will in no way say they are representative of students overall. They tend to be very high achieving. They also, I think 60% of them have a parent who worked at Google at one time or another. But when we first brought prototypes to them, literally one of the kids was like, oh, is this generative AI? And I was like, this was in like January of, 2023. And I was like, really? I hardly know what generative AI is. So yes, we have some of those students volunteer to be on our red team.
When you were identifying some of the issues that you were seeing, my son uses Khan Academy to help bolster some of the stuff he does at school. None of what you were saying was a shock to me, because I see how he interacts with it and how he interacts things with school. His difficulties in explaining his own thinking or connecting the dots of you know, he can solve the problem, but he can't tell you how. Those sorts of issues. It's also not a shock to me that you're seeing very short answers and them not really digging in how you want them to dig in. Do we still have her there?
Yeah, I just turned off the sharing so that I could actually see a bigger screen with you all.
No problem. So I'm wondering the differences between him interacting with AI or interacting with a human tutor is the sort of engagement he can get from a personal interaction and praise, and seeing a challenge as a challenge instead of just something the computer is spitting at him. So I'm wondering how you're going to continue to explore, and if you have ideas, how you're going to try to push for that sort of engagement and more human sort of interaction that a real tutor can provide as opposed to a chatbot.
Yep, good question. So first I'll say our first comparison isn't to a human tutor, but to all the kids who don't have a human tutor, who don't have a parent at home who can help them on their math, who don't have, or whose teacher is helping the 6 other kids or doing the small group instruction while they're supposed to be working independently. And so step 1 is, can we make this better than nothing? Like better than not having help? And so we think we're getting to that point, but yes, we want to also think about what human tutors are doing. And we've been doing some more thinking about the motivational aspects of what human tutors do. And so it's not even just praise. Like sometimes it's actually like a little kick in the pants. Like, hey, come on now, you can do, like, I know you can do this. What are you doing? Like, but different kids are going to respond differently to different motivations and different motivational techniques. So we've been doing a lot of just hypothesizing about, are there ways that we can start to see what is motivating to particular students, and having Conmigo doing some of those things. Sal says with his oldest son, the biggest thing that he does when he's working them is just kind of be like a, oh, you might want to check that again before you submit it. Like, is that a thing? And you know, different kids are going to do different things. So I think it's somewhat personalized, but I do think there is something about Conmigo not just doing the content help, but providing some more different kinds of motivational messages depending on the student. I see a question in the chat about information based on the student's level. So the reading level, as I said, can be set. And then depending on which course you're in, if you're in a grade 3 math course, it's going to respond kind of at that level. If you're in a grade, you know, in the calculus course and doing there, it's going to respond more at that level. But that so far is the limitation, the limits of where we've gotten to really tailoring it in terms of grade level.
I have a question. You're just talking about you have different students like enrolled in Khan Academy. Meaning, I assume that there are so many multilingual students who come from different language backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds. How do you ensure that their languages and cultures are represented? And how do we make sure that the AI does not like appropriate more when the learners have different languages, because there are different ways of even using this, even using the English language.
Could someone repeat that? I couldn't quite get the.
So what I mean is
a little louder.
A little louder.
Yeah, what I mean is you have diverse students in terms of languages and cultures. How do you make sure that you represent and integrate those languages and cultures so that they're inclusive in this program? And also, how do you make sure that so it also does not like portray like one type of reality that English is the American standard English, gives the learners in different varieties.
Yeah, so the only languages that we officially support, because we've tested them and tested the moderation with them and tested the responses, are the Spanish and Portuguese. But if students talk to it in other languages, it will talk back in those languages. So we debated on whether we should just lock it down and not let it respond in those languages at all, because we haven't tested them and aren't able to make sure that all of the moderation happens and all of the things that you're talking about are true. And our student population was telling us, we want to talk in the, just, it's okay, we understand. Yes, we get that there's risks when I'm using it in this other language, but I really like doing that and I understand where this is coming from. So we opened it up to those languages, but there's still a lot of work to be done to officially like test where all of those are, test the responses, and think about, you know, are all of those things working the way we want them to, in the way we would design them to in those other languages. The first girl I sat down next to, the first time I went out to do some piloting, actually here in the Phoenix area, the first question she asked me was, does it speak Swahili? And I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea if it speaks Swahili. Let's type in something in Swahili and see if it does. And it responded in Swahili. And I said, I have no idea if this is working right. And I said, what did it say? And she said, oh yeah, it's responding like I want it to. So in some ways, it's kind of amazing the extent of what it can do. And then the question is, you know, where are the holes and what do we need to do? Because we're not going to be up for training it to fix those holes in every language that we offer. We offer Khan Academy in 50 languages at this point. So it's a trade-off. It's again one of those trade-offs. Do we open it up and wait until it's much better and we're sure of it? Or do we let kids have the access? And we've erred on the side of letting them have the access, but officially we know we've tested it in Spanish and Portuguese.
As a follow-up to that DI-related question, I will have a quick question. So what do you think about the existing views of AI when it comes to assisting students with neurodiversities? Do you have any application of the application you introduced us today when it comes to reaching students with specific learning needs or falling under that umbrella of neurodiversities?
We have not done anything specific for students with neurodiversity. So we have not done any particular designs or help with them. So that's the short answer to that.
And we have a question from the room, Dr. Eben.
Okay, just a couple of quick questions. The first one, you mentioned that you provide the prompt, which is 500-word prompt to the engine, to the model. Something that I'm assuming that's proprietary, right? That's not something you would share with others, or is it?
No, we don't make it public because it is, you know, it is a little bit of our secret sauce of how we brought it together. But just generally, I can give you the structure of it. Is essentially, you know, it first says what it is. You are a Socratic tutor. I am a student that you are teaching. Provides a little bit more about how the tone we want it to take, because we want it to align with basically how Sal talks and how research is, which is a little bit whimsical, a little bit of wonder, a little bit of, you know, those kinds of things. So we tell it a little bit about personality. Then we have a list of things to do, a list of things not to do. And then we have some safety, what we call safety blocks, which are the things about like not doing their homework, not giving them the answer, those kinds of things. So that's the basic structure of it. And then so that's the tutoring one. And as we've done others, you know, the prompts, as I said, have gotten longer and longer, and we've ended up breaking them up into sections. But essentially that idea of who should the tutor, what persona should the tutor, should the model adopt? Who are they interacting with? What should they do and what shouldn't they do is the basic structure of all of our prompts.
Kristen, I had a question for the multilingual support. Actually, two questions. So number one, in that prompt line, can they type in non-Romanized languages like Hindi, Chinese, Thai? And then my second question would be, you know, it seems like a limitation is they have to be able to know how to at least write and spell enough for the engine to recognize it. Is there any look at having voice recognition so they can actually talk to it with their natural voice?
So yes and yes. Hang on, I'm gonna share my screen again. Let's go back here. Let's get out of presenting. So we have speech to text and text to speech. And students can enter their own Let me go back to get KEYNOTE up here. Students can click on the microphone here and get speech recognition. And so what you'll say will be typed out. And then you can also turn on KEYNOTE voice, and you can select 4 different voices and it will speak back to you instead of having you read it. And yes, it does recognize non-Roman characters, so you can type. The difficulty is in the right to left languages. So Arabic, etc. And right to left, it just, the cursor goes left to right now. So those don't work as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr.
I had a question that relates to programs like this that students may not have access to because they don't have money in the family to afford them, even ones that are low cost. They may not have a credit card, for example, to be able to sign up for these things. And what concerns me, having my daughter use some of these like Mathway, and she used Khan Academy too, but the videos, not this. It makes me wonder if we're starting to perpetuate further divides between students who can't access these resources that really could help them. Have you guys had conversations about how maybe students who are really socioeconomically disadvantaged to be able to have ways to access these tools for free, so that they're not left behind, and being able, especially with math, which is just one of the biggest gatekeepers of our education system.
Yes, and you all are in a state that is doing something really interesting with us. So the main way that we historically, so even as Khan Academy, I'll tell a little bit of a long answer to get around to this question. Khan Academy started with independent learners. In 2019, we launched a districts offering because we know that even with the independent learners and it being free, we're still not reaching the students who need us most, in part because they're not out there looking for answers and help and how to get there. So we said we need to be in classrooms and schools. To be in districts, we need some things like automatic rostering for students so they can automatically get their classes and students set up. They need professional learning for their teachers. The district wants reports on how much students are learning based on this. And we found if we gave it away for free, districts didn't do much with it. They actually need a little skin in the game to push the usage of it that we know is efficacious. We're not just trying to sell it to make money. We're trying to sell it to get usage in classrooms by all students. So in 2019, we launched our districts program. With KEYNOTE, we are now offering that as an add-on for the district. So the district can also purchase Khan Academy with KEYNOTE and be able to offer that to all of their students. So that then gives students opportunity to access KEYNOTE from their schools. Now in Indiana, Secretary Jenner last fall created an RFP that districts could apply for use of an AI-powered tutor. And so across Indiana, 20 districts are partnering with us. I think there's 5 districts that are partnering with some other folks. And so districts applied for those funds from the state and got funding. And we have 20 districts in Indiana that are using KEYNOTE through that state funding mechanism. So it's not all up to individual families having to have a credit card or the $4 a month that it costs to use this. They actually can get access through schools, and it's funded in that way. So we're in conversations with other states and other ways to make this happen through schools and through school funding.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
A limitation I see is, or within tutoring and individual support, is that one person only knows so much about where the student is at. I see a possible future for KEYNOTE is that it can access all of the different concepts and content that a student learns. So they're asking for help in, say, physics or chemistry, and they have to form an answer, which is English, and then they have to explain their calculations. So the math can KEYNOTE access all of that and refer students to that knowledge and to let them know, and is that data, or would that data be saved in their entire profile, or is that something that KEYNOTE just quote unquote, creates itself? So each user, the 1.2 million 2+ hour users, they each are getting a KEYNOTE tailored specifically to them.
Yeah, so that student model that I was talking about, that's the profile where we save for a student all of their skills in every course they're in. So if they're working on a physics course and a calculus course, that student model on Khan Academy, we have saved their whole profile of what skills they have in there. Now the question is how to get that into Khanmigo. So we don't, Khanmigo is, working off the OpenAI model. We do not want to send every student's full profile all the time to the AI model. Like there's a whole lot of data privacy and issues there. So we save it on our site where we know where it is and we have all of the security around it. And then the idea is that as Khanmigo is talking, we're able to inject the key pieces of that student model at the appropriate times into the conversation that Khanmigo is having, so that, hey, if we're working on this particular physics skill and it also requires this calculus skill, we go over to that other domain model that I was talking about that links all this. So, hey, we're working on this physics skill. What are the other skills that are related to this physics skill? What do we know about the student's proficiency on those skills? And then we can feed that into Khanmigo. That is to come. Right now, it knows your proficiency on this particular skill and 1 to 3 prerequisite skills in that course, but not across courses. So we're working to go across courses and those kinds of pieces, definitely on our roadmap of the things that we're building.
Is that what goes by the acronym RAG?
Was that RAG?
Yeah, retrieval augmented generation.
Yeah.
Is that?
We are mostly using RAG for things like when it's recommending links. So when it's recommending related content, like you might want to go watch this video, it's getting that by going into our embeddings database that's full of all of the videos and all of the articles that we have, so it doesn't make up links to our own content. The thing that we're doing with the students is actually prompt injection, not a RAG technique. Although the domain model we may end up doing through a RAG technique. Yeah.
All right. I think we would like to thank you for all the questions. Due to time limit, we need to switch to the other part of the symposium today. Thank you so much, Dr. Kristen. We have 2 more questions in the chat box. If you can answer them through the chat box, we would appreciate that. Now it's time to give some break, 15-minute break to the symposium. So for those in the room, please help yourself with the lunch boxes provided in the back side of the room. For those in the chat, feel free to drink some food for yourselves. And we will get back in 12 minutes.